With that, I'd like to introduce my friend Belinda Brunner, who works at ASC as Director of Test Development and Digital Assessment Project Manager for our key clients. She's got extensive experience in the assessment industry, both on the vendor side and on the client side. So she's highly familiar with what goes into developing and publishing assessments, especially high stakes exams such as healthcare certifications. So with that, I'll turn it over to Belinda and let her present. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nate. And hello, everyone. Just give me a second and I'm going to share my screen. And then let's see. Okay, you should be seeing my slides. So let me know if you're not. I'm very happy today to be talking about test publishing quality control. Not only have I worked in the testing industry, but I've also worked in healthcare quality improvement. So quality is obviously very important to me. So when we think about test publishing is actually the final step in everything that you've done to develop your test. So all of that is packaged up and put into the publication process. So we want to make sure that we get it right. And so what can go wrong? This is a what's called either a cause and effect diagram, or sometimes you might refer to it as a fishbone diagram or an Ishikawa diagram. And basically the horizontal axis is the problem or the issue. So here we have test publishing errors, and then there are categories, major categories, and then off of the major categories are subcategories of errors or things that could happen in your published test that would cause a test publishing error. The reason I like the fishbone diagram or the cause and effect diagram is I think it's a very good method for the whole team that's involved in some sort of project, in this case, publishing and developing a test, to really think about everything that they need to consider when they're setting up their quality control practices, not only for the publication process, but really through every step of the process. What am I going to do when I'm developing items to make sure that the items are correct, that the key is correct? How am I going to check on the psychometric side that all this psychometric analysis has been performed correctly? Basically, it's just a way of framing your thought process as to everything that potentially could go wrong in a test, and then making sure that you've developed policies and procedures to prevent those things from going wrong. So, I like to categorize errors in tests by severity or significance. And here I've come up with a very simple kind of categorization. The most minor error would be something I would consider a cosmetic error. It's a minor nuisance error, might be a little bit embarrassing to the test sponsor, but it's not going to cause a big issue for test takers. They may just look at it and smile or think, oh, there's a typo there, there's a little bit of a mistake. So some examples of that are words that are slightly misspelled, maybe a typo, maybe punctuation that's missing or not quite correct. So it's cosmetic. It doesn't really cause a lot of problems. The second most severe category would be something that is a more serious error, and it's an error that has potential to cause construct irrelevant variance. So the construct is what we want to test. And if there's construct irrelevant variance, something has potential to interfere with our ability to test that construct or to cause some measurement error in our assessment outcome. So those might be things like more significant grammar or style errors, where maybe the word was a little bit confusing because it was so misspelled. So some test takers may have found the question ambiguous or confusing to answer. And then the most serious error, the ones that we absolutely positively want to avoid, are critical incidents. And those are the types of errors that can lead to incorrect decisions. A candidate would fail the exam when they otherwise would have passed, or vice versa. Or if it's not a pass-fail exam, they received the wrong score, and then it affected something like an admissions decision if it's an admissions test. Examples of those critical incidents are things like scoring errors and miskeys, where the correct response was incorrectly identified. And those things can be built into the publication process, but they can also occur more upstream with there being an error, for instance, in the psychometric analysis that leads to a key error, a scoring error, or maybe the SMEs miscorrectly identified what the correct response was. So again, the key is that although the test publishing is the culmination and it's the final check, we want to build quality in throughout our test development and test publishing process to prevent all types of errors. And each place that those errors should occur, we should be having some sort of checks. Years ago, I used to do healthcare quality improvement, and I was exposed to this concept of, is 99% good enough? And probably for most things, that might be good enough. But if we think about it, and these are some statistics. I went online recently and tried to update the statistics. I can't verify or attest to the accuracy of these statistics, but I think it makes a point that for some things, 99.9% is just not good enough. If it were 99.9% good, according to this statistic, we would have 810 commercial airliners crash each month. And so the 99.9% being a metric of good may not work for things like critical errors. You want to get it right 100% of the time, because those critical errors in a test publishing process, errors such as those we discussed earlier, scores being incorrectly applied, can lead to loss of reputation for the test sponsor and sometimes the test publisher if it's a vendor as well. It can lead to, from the candidate perspective, perhaps them not being able to get a job because they didn't pass the certification exam when they really should have, and they really did. And in a worst case scenario, it can lead to a class action lawsuit for the test sponsor. So those errors, those critical incidences really need to be avoided. And in that case, in those types of cases, perhaps 99.9% is not good enough. So when we talk about setting up a quality control process, what we're really thinking about is performing some sort of comparison. We want to take a look at what is, that is the test that we've published and we are getting ready to deliver live to candidates, versus what should be. What is it supposed to look like and perform like? So how do we really determine what should be? Well, we have sources of truth, and those sources of truth are, from the test publishing perspective, the blueprint report, which has our content light an outline in it that says the weights or the percentages of items that should be presented for each section of our content outline. Our standard setting report, which says what the cut score should be, how the analysis that provides the equating information. We may also have things like committee member minutes or council resolutions that say that, you know, the blueprint was adopted, or provides information on how the test is going to be administered, how long it's going to be, how many items. And of course, we have the item bank. It's impractical to look at those primary sources of truth every single time you publish a test and do a comparison with the primary source of truth. So often those are the information gleaned from those reports are put into something called a test specification document. And then, of course, we have the item bank, which shows the primary source of truth and is the source of truth for what the items should look like. So the test specification document really is the Bible for the entire test publishing process. It talks about it should talk about how the exam is going to be delivered, what the administration model is, whether it's linear fixed form or it's an adaptive test, the duration of the test, how many minutes you're going to, or what the time frame is you're going to provide candidates to deliver the test, the presentation, how the items look like, what items are being presented, the navigation of the test, whether you're going to allow candidates to go back and review items after they've moved off from that screen. Will you provide a review screen? Will they be able to go back to other sections after they've completed this section? Again, what the scoring is, what the cut score is, and then just overall how the exam is meant to be configured. So how is quality control performed? It really is dependent upon the publication process. And in a simple way of looking at it, there are perhaps three different ways that an exam can be published. One is that the test sponsor hands off their content, or perhaps the vendor already has their content because the vendor is also involved in the test development process, to a vendor, and the vendor actually publishes the test on the test sponsor's behalf. Another way is that the test sponsor may be responsible for putting the test into some sort of publishable test package, like a DAT file, and handing that off to the vendor, and then the vendor puts that onto their platform for delivery. And then the third way is that there's an integrated platform that includes test development, item banking, delivery. It's all rolled into one, so everything is done within one tool or one software. So this is an example of a process for quality control if the content is being handed off to the vendor. So in this case, the test sponsor needs to check that the content is complete and correct prior to handoff. So usually the test vendor wants a sort of button down content before they get it. So you shouldn't be making content changes after, in this model, after it's gone to the vendor. The content, all of the reviews by the SMEs, etc., should have been already done. Then you hand it off to the delivery vendor, who creates the test package and performs quality control. That quality control might be that they compare, or it is that they compare the test specification document to what they're seeing on the screen. So are all the items that are supposed to be in the exam? Are they all displaying as they should display? That may mean a character by character check against the source document, or it could mean a first and last character check. It just really depends upon what the test sponsor and the test vendor have agreed that process should look like. You also want to do, the vendor will also do scoring checks. And it typically is something like, they'll make sure that if they go through and answer the test, and they get a 0 score, they don't answer any of the items correct, that is actually what's happening. And then they'll do 100% check, a check at the cut score, and usually one above the cut score and one below the cut score, to make sure that it's scoring as it should score. They'll make sure that the duration, the timing is exactly as it should be. So again, that test specification document is going to be the comparison, and that's the Bible that the test publisher will use to both publish the exam and then check that it's been published appropriately. So the test vendor and the test sponsor should really work on creating a good, sound test specification document. And then the test sponsor will typically get the exam and perform some sort of final review and approval, just to check off and sort of give their exam their blessing. And then the vendor performs just final production validation to make sure that it can and will be published on their platform. And that, things like that, from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, that everything is validated and appropriate. So this is an example of kind of a typical process, perhaps, if the handoff from the test sponsor to the vendor occurs at the content level, sort of the raw content level. The second option is that the test sponsor actually hands off a completed test package to the vendor. And in that case, the test sponsor assumes responsibility for creating the test package, and also performing all of the QCs the quality control checks that I just talked about. Are the items appropriate? Is the scoring appropriate? And then they're going to hand it off to the vendor as a completed package. And the vendor will typically do some sort of production validation, just to make sure that it will perform appropriately on their platform before it's ready and scheduled to go live. And then lastly, if it's an integrated platform, the test package and the QC is performed in the same system, like Fast Test, which is ASC's product. So everything is done in one platform. You're not handing off content from a different system, a different item banking system, into a different delivery system. It's all integrated together. So I've talked a little bit about what should be checked, but just to go over that in more detail. First of all, we're going to check the things that were the delivery side of it. are the correct displays and assets delivered with the exam? If it's meant to have a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, is it there? If it's meant to have a tutorial, is the tutorial there? Is it meant to have a calculator throughout the exam or only on certain items? Is the calculator displayed when it's meant to be displayed? Is it the correct kind of calculator? Is there any latency in the delivery? By that I mean, is there a delay when you move from one item to another? Sometimes that can occur if you have a lot of images or videos in your exam. It may take a little bit longer for the video or the images to display. So is there latency? Is the latency acceptable, or is it too long so that it's going to confuse the candidate? Is the time allotted for the exam and the sections correct? Is the branding and the style correctly displayed according to what has been agreed with the test sponsor? As far as functionality goes, here we're looking for things like the navigation. Can you navigate through the exam as you expected? If you intend to review items that have already been answered, are you able to go back and review those items? If items include audio and video, you should be checking that the audio and the video can be played in every single item that's meant to have it. If the video is meant to loop, check to make sure that the video loops. If it's not meant to loop, it shouldn't loop. So you want to check that. And again, your test specifications documents should say what functionality you want. Does the desired functionality for answer options selection work as expected? So if you're meant to use both the mouse and the keyboard, do both of them function? If the items have pop-ups and tabs, are they displaying appropriately? Does the exam time out as you would expect it to? Again, these are just some of the things that you should be checking. Presentation, do items present as expected? Again, is the content displaying as appropriately? If, again, sometimes you may want to do character by character checks or just a holistic kind of review of the items. Are the correct assets associated with the right items? So this is particularly important if you have an exam that has a lot of images within the exam, to make sure that those images are correct and appropriate, and it's the right one that is displayed with each item. I once worked on an exam where every item in one particular section of the exam had an image in the stem, and then each answer option, of which I think there were 6, had different images. And the images, sometimes there were just very subtle differences. So we had to be very careful and make sure that the images were appropriate for that exam. We would look at the image IDs to make sure that the correct image ID was associated with each item according, again, to what is in the test specifications. And then you, again, want to make sure that the font size is correct. Here, particularly if you have quantitative items and you have math equations, you want to make sure that those equations are appropriately. If you're using something like a math editor, making sure that it's all presenting as it should present. Scoring, does the item score as expected? You want to look at both item level scoring and exam level scoring. Is a cut score correctly applied? If you're using an adaptive exam, that's going to be a much more complicated Scoring check process, looking at making sure that the adaptive algorithm is selecting the items appropriately according to as intended, that it's scored appropriately, and that the termination rules for the exam are being correctly applied. It's typically done in some sort of simulation process and scenario checking process. And then you want to look at the results. Does the score report display and print out as expected? Is the information on the score report correct? Are the results reported in those score reports correct? This may be a little bit more complicated if you're doing something like diagnostic scoring, where you're providing feedback to the candidates, making sure that you have the feedback that you're providing aligned with the candidate or the scores correctly and appropriately, and that the sections are all scoring as they should if you're using sectional scoring as well. If you want to put some other suggestions that you found helpful to check prior to go live, if you want to put those in the chat, please feel free to do so, and we'll talk about that and have a discussion about that after I finish the slides. Now, there are special circumstances and considerations that I've encountered that you may also need to think about. One is, an important one is publishing while you're migrating item banks. So if you're moving from one item bank to another, ideally you want to finish in one item bank and then move to another item bank, and that should be, graceful and clean. But that's not always the case. So you might be working in two banks at one time, and then it becomes a question of which bank is the source of truth. So you really need to have a process where you're making sure that it's clear to everyone what work is going to be done in what bank and when. And then after you close down one bank, the bank you're moving from, to make sure that you have a process to make sure that all of the changes that you made in that bank have been appropriately reflected in your new bank. This can get a very complicated process if you have multiple exams and you're trying to migrate them and you're publishing at the same time. So you really need to think about what the migration is going to look like and what steps are going to be done in what bank, and how you can make sure that you maintain the source of truth during the migration. Another issue that may come up is when you have no WYSIWYG in your item bank. What I mean by that is what you see is what you get. So you may not have a preview within the item bank that previews the item exactly how it would look for the candidate. So your SMEs may not be able to review the item as the candidate would see it. That may not be as important if it's a text-based item, but if it's an item that is more innovative and is displaying more on screen with images, etc., other than just text-based. So you'll need to think about how your SMEs can make sure that the item is appropriate if you're not able to preview it within your item bank. And then you want to make sure that the environment that you're QCing your exam in, or that the test vendor is QCing the exam in your behalf, on your behalf, is exactly like the exam is going to display in the production environment. If you're not able to QC in the production environment, you have to be assured that whatever test environment you're QCing in, the exam is going to present and function exactly as it would be in the production environment. So you're able to take the exam and QC it and be confident that you're seeing it exactly as the candidate would see it. I'm going to date myself a little bit perhaps, but if you are familiar with the movie Love Story, there's a line, a very famous line, love means never having to say you're sorry. I found this, quality means never having to say you're sorry. If you build quality in from the beginning and QC and really think about it in a thoughtful process, then you won't have to, or the odds that you will have to apologize to candidates because their exam was misscored, or handle candidate complaints because they're complaining about an item that was misspelled, or an item that was confusing, or an image that was left out of an item that should have been there. You won't have to apologize or be dealing with those situations, which is why it makes the quality control process so important. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Now, and just go back to, does anybody have any questions or comments? If so, you can please feel free to put something in the chat. And I see there are some questions, so I'll take a look at those. There are questions, Nate, about certificates, I see.
Yeah, I see that. No, there won't be any certificates for this. This is not a formal educational course.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, cool. Well, I want to thank you all, and yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.